Sorry about that. Just making sure we have things set up here. And it looks like we do. So, okay. Well, hey there. We are Mindful Madness, and we are doing a live discussion about in regards to Mad Reads, which is a book club that is built into Mindful Madness. And we are going through the section in regards to women, labor, and value, what women sustain, produce, and are seldom credited for accurately, if at all. And so this book club exists on Substack. So you can go over there. All of the books are listed on there. There are companion guides for, self-guided. You can either catch this live and see what people are talking about or how I'm presenting it. You can also, there are tools in there as well if you want to facilitate your own book club or introduce it to a book club or a group that you're already part of. There's facilitator guides in there. And then I also do, I just started doing a local book club for the immediate area that I live in. And so lots of activities going on and just kind of getting things up and running as far as some of the newer stuff goes. And then I also have things in the background. So this Mindful Madness is about helping people get on the same page when we share commonalities, things that we've learned about. It makes it easier for us to really just get to the point so that we can get into action items. So the main purpose of the group is to take action in some way, locally, statewide, or nationally. So, and we're here to help connect different groups together and become a resource that we can all access so that we can become more of a connected community in our immediate area and have the access widespread as well. So, with that being said, I'm Christina, and I'm inspired to do this sort of thing because I have a special interest in analyzing systems and patterns that directly affect women. And I do have a degree in psychology, although I do not speak for or diagnose individuals. So I'm more of like, I like looking at the bigger picture when it comes to certain things and how and picking up trends and this sort of thing. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into women's work. The first 20,000 years. This was written by Elizabeth Wayland Barber, and I hit the highlights with this. And I do, and you can go in and look. I've already taken care of Invisible Women, so you can go through and kind of see what that's about. I kind of picked the highlights, what stands out, things that it might relate to currently. Depends on the book, depends on the best way of maybe consuming it. We all learn differently. We all bring in information differently. A lot of the books that you will find in the Mad Reads book club, you can get for free on the library apps. I've noticed that there's about half of them that are free through these apps. You just take your library card, put your library card number into one of these apps. I use, what is the name of that little thing? I use Hoopla, is the one that I use, but I'm aware that there's a few other ones. But anyway, and both Invisible Women and Women's Work were both in there, so both of these books are free to access. Invisible Women, a wonderful, a lot of detail. That it's a very well written, pleasantly written, where it really kind of brings data into our real lives and how it affects us, whether we're aware of it or not, throughout our day, throughout our week, throughout our freaking year, throughout our lives. And how it really does impact us tremendously. And us being aware of that is really super important for many, many reasons. So I do recommend you probably get that one in print. That way you can take notes and that sort of thing. Women's Work, I kind of recommend that one is done through audio, and because she has such a pleasant way of writing, and she slows down the process of talking about how textiles are made and how they developed over time. And the first couple sections in the book, she really does go into pretty good detail with that. And I appreciate, and she does this on purpose, because much of the development of early technologies was done during a period of time where hours were not counted, so we weren't punching clocks. So there's a rhythm to it. There's an inner working and a group cohesiveness. There's a unity aspect that comes with it. There is a way of tapping, not tapping nature, they were part of nature. And we forget in our modern society that we're still connected to nature. And although sometimes it can really feel like we're not, we still very much are. So all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. So down below, I went ahead and I put some of my notes down there. And I did take some pretty good notes on this, but again, I'm going to go over overall broader concepts, and we'll get into some detail here and there, but this is not designed to replace the book, although it offers a lot of information where if you simply don't have the time, it does help you get on the same page overall with the rest of the group, so that when you do interact with the group, that you do have commonalities to share, and you can say, oh yeah, somebody did mention that book, or yeah, I do recognize this concept, or that historical fact, or this data point, this sort of thing. So you don't have to memorize everything. You don't have to read the entire book. I do recommend that you do. But we are all very busy. My children are grown and out of the house at this point. But there's a lot of us that have little ones running around, and I remember the days. So anytime I could just plug in, get little bits here and there, that was ideal during those times. The little thing down below here, I'm putting that up there because as we kind of talk about it, it goes through the different periods of time throughout history, and so you can kind of go in, blow it up on your screen, that sort of thing, so you can kind of go, oh wait, what happened during and when exactly was that? And I found that if I went through and I wrote those down and did some little cheat sheet stuff in there, that it just made it a little bit easier for me to kind of go, oh, okay. Now, it's a guide. It's not hard set. And some of this kind of could overlap. So you might have the Neolithic and like the Stone Age and the Copper Age. There's going to be a period of time where they kind of overlap each other, and that can be by region. In a couple of instances, you could kind of skip over an era or a point of development, just simply because one society introduced to another society and basically skipped a grade. So there can be some of that kind of stuff going on, but let's go ahead and go over this just kind of in brief. So humans, or some form of human, has been kicking around here on this planet for about 2.6 million years. So the lower, middle, and upper Paleolithic, or the Old Stone Age, was from about 2.6 million to about 10,000 BCE. That's where we find like the earliest rough stone tools. They were, for the most part, nomadic hunter-gatherers. They did not stay in one spot. They moved around quite a bit. This is the earliest cave art that we have found, and that they did acquire control of fire, and that was shared. And she does a good job of talking about the intermixings during that time. There's also another book that lays over on this one so nicely, and that is Goliath's Curse. And I'll put up a little note. That one is done by Nate. I think his name was Nate. Luke Kemp. So Luke Kemp, Goliath's Curse, and that book was released last summer, 2025. Wonderful, and boy, that one's really been kicking around in my head, and that's not part of the Mad Reads book club, but if you get a chance, go through that one. Audio's really good on that one. And I did actually have to pay for that one, so I found that somewhere and paid for the audio on that. Goliath's Curse talks about how early on, how interactive humans were with each other. It was important to share information, and there was a lot of comings and goings. So sliding in from group to group, staying with units, and then they would gather together, and then maybe they would wander off with different groups. So very fluid during that time, almost like junior high and high school, how the kids intermingle with different groups. They might jump groups, that sort of thing. That was very much the behavior during that period of time in particular. And then moving up into and overlapping a little bit, but about 10,000 to about 8,000 BCE, we have the Mesolithic. So this one. And of course, it varies by region because it just depends on exposure and stumbling across different ways of doing things, that sort of thing. So these stone tools become more delicate, smaller, more refined during that period of time. There's also signs of fishing technologies. There's advancements in, and basically that's where we start seeing signs or indications of cordage, and we'll kind of get into that. That's one of the first technologies created by men that really kind of stepped us forward quite a bit. And then we go into the Neolithic, or the New Stone Age. This is the very, very start of the agriculture revolution. So we're starting to propagate plants, or tending them, paying attention to what plant does what, and if you do certain things, then maybe that helps it along so that you can access it. So they're starting to keep track of plants in a more thoughtful approach. That's about 8,000 to about 3,000 BCE, and that's the New Stone Age. They're starting to do some domestication of animals. We see pottery starting to enter the picture. So before then, because they moved around a lot, they weren't stationary, that they would travel lighter. So pottery of any real substance didn't come around until a little bit later when they started to settle. And then we have the Copper Age, and that was about 5,000 to about 3,000. So you can kind of see where the Copper and the New Stone Age kind of intermingle a bit there. So overlapping with the late Neolithic. So we're seeing copper tools during that time, and we're seeing more of a social stratification. So we're starting to see hierarchies. The very beginnings of hierarchies or stratification within groups. Then we move into the Bronze Age, and that's about 3,300 to about 1,200 BCE. We have bronze tools and weapons. We have urban civilizations, so we have a pretty good size city centers that people are congregating within and building. We have empires during that time. Long distance trade has definitely set in. Writing systems are developed. And then we go into the Iron Age, 1200 to about 500 BCE. And we have the iron tools and weapons, expanding empires, expanding agriculture, and this brings about classical antiquity. So, and I'll just keep that little cheat sheet down there. So, one of the things that has really been happening within realistically the last, like DNA is just so fresh, and the stuff that we're learning just from that, and that's only been around 15 years now, like in being able to do it at the level that we're able to do it at right now. So being able to take DNA samples from historical sites that were excavated in the past, and then what's coming up now, layering that in. So if we kind of think about how we would research things historically through anthropology and that sort of thing, is really very new. If we kind of think about Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones was 1985-ish in there, and we kind of think about, okay, that's steering, and that was set back like 1942, and we kind of think, so in those periods of time we still have like the colonization. When we do come across something, we're really after gold and silver or anything of any value. We're basically raiding it, taking it back to whatever home country you happen to come from, and it's being given to kings and queens and this sort of thing, or being kept for themselves, basically just looting. There's really not a lot of significant documentation, not the way that we do it now. So now, there's a science behind it. There's a process behind it, documentation, samples, photos. We are able to test in different ways for the age of different items, the soil. All of this stuff is now layering, and we're getting better ideas of what was actually going on in the recent past and the very distant past. One of the other things that we find as well is early archaeologists had, for good reason, you don't know what you don't know, but layering in their own culture, their own perspectives, their own ideas, and filtering that over the top of what they're looking at and defining it in ways that perpetuated maybe what their current experience is, instead of just letting the evidence speak for itself. And part of that was also because we just simply didn't have the technology yet. Um, so, but now we're getting clearer ideas. One of the other things as well is when the majority of that early on work was done by predominantly white males. Now that we have more people, more diverse groups from other cultures exploring their own histories on their own through something that's a little closer to actually how that culture might have functioned, instead of a different culture overlaying their thoughts, ideas, and points of view. And then also the women that are out there and how information is looked at differently just based on gender points of view. So all of these things really help us understand more about the human condition and how we've advanced through time. We know predominantly our bodies have not changed very much. It's our technologies that have changed the most, and it is through the passing on of understanding of technologies that puts us above, if you want to say that, other species on this planet. So that ability to collectively pass on information over time and to build on that. So that being said, so early on, and this focuses most specifically on the contributions of women through time. And when you have a male perspective and male thought processes, especially early on, they were more about what something is worth. Those gold artifacts, the copper artifacts, this sort of thing had supposed more value. And because of that, because we didn't have the processes yet in place, we lost a lot of information early on through archaeological and anthropological excavations and messings through these early sites, and things that were commonly thrown away, shoes and textiles and more fragile things that were dismissed for the most part early on. Not always, but a lot of times there are instances where this stuff was set aside in piles and basically just discarded instead of being studied. Women, for the most part, and she talks about how some of this stuff kind of processes and how men became more or less the ones that took care of or explored things like copper and iron and this sort of thing, where women really dominated as far as like understanding what plants to eat, what not to eat, medicinal purposes. This sort of thing was a common knowledge base, predominantly something that women acquired and passed on. Not that it wasn't taught to men or men didn't learn it, but their stuff might be. See, it wasn't tasked by gender. It was tasked by practicality. So, for instance, it was common for women to hunt as well. If they were pregnant or had a young child, during that small period of time during a lifespan, then they would stay closer, keeping the children safe, keeping so they would do other things that kept the community going. Um, I in and it was more fluid as far as basically if something needed to be done, then as a community you just made sure it got done. So definitely more fluid, more egalitarian, that sort of thing. And that was the way that was clear up until about the time that they started settling down in agriculture and that stratification started to happen. But remember, that was only 10 to 12,000 years ago. So for, uh, 2.6 million years, that was not how we lived. So just a thought to ponder. Let's see, so basically textiles don't survive very well in archaeology. So what we end up doing is when we look at things now, we look for the things that might be missing, or we look for different aspects to help us understand what might be there. So we don't have the cordage, but when we find grave sites and we see beads in the gravesite with holes in them, we know that cordage was used for necklaces and this sort of thing. We also, if there are carvings or images that were put on cave walls, and there are things like straps around feet or tassels for early, sometimes they had like, it was almost like an apron, and it was like little tassels or cordage that hung down around their waists, or some of the technologies for early cord technology would be the ability to make nets to cast for fishing, that sort of thing. So there's certain things that allude to the idea that this technology existed and that they used it and applied it in various ways. Let's see. So, and because a lot of the women's work, that because it had to do with food production, because it had to do with textiles and this sort of thing, and because, early on, especially for common people, many were not educated, so they did not read or write. And so certain aspects wouldn't be passed down because of those specific things as well. So, women's work was there, but it disappears from the record frequently and consistently. So Elizabeth, she does go through and she looks at and introduces different methodological corrections, tools used to research the past. So looking at fiber impressions that maybe were left in a wet clay, looking at indirect evidence, reading myths differently. She does a beautiful job of going in and talking about that. And as a matter of fact, now when I and we kind of know that it's there, but when you go into depth like a book like this, it makes you appreciate like traditional clothing and how much of that dates back 12,000 years. Those styles, certain things that we do have been passed down through clothing like language. And In a lot of respects, it was the first uh, equivalent to written language through textiles, through the images, the type of cloth. They would weave stories into the cloth, all of this stuff, different meanings with different colors and this sort of thing. It's very, very interesting. Um, and then also following labor patterns. So, and one of the things that she talks about, which I thought was really interesting, you can study something, you can read about something. So, people that study pottery, for example, or carving, you can study it, you can look at it, you can measure it, take pictures of it, this sort of thing. Um, but you don't really get to know it from their perspective unless you use the materials and the tools that they used. And so she goes through and she takes the time to do this. And she finds a piece of Scottish cloth that had this beautiful pattern on it, and she wanted to recreate it for herself so that she could use it in her own home. And instead of doing it in a more modern fashion, she went through the process of creating it the way that they would have created it and putting the pattern in. And she talks about what she learned through that process. And then also sharing it with other people and them going through the pottery process and really learning like what works and what doesn't work. Because these are things that developed over such a long period of time that it had nuances. It was an art, and time was not an issue. It was not factored in. It was just simply the creation of this thing. And so time and effort went into these beautiful, beautiful textiles and pottery and these things that they made. Let's see. Okay. So I think one of the things that's very interesting about this is this book isn't just about textiles. It's about the infrastructure that helps a society or a village survive. And then understanding more about the women's aspect of that. Because, I mean, history books are constantly written about the guys' side of it, written by guys, for guys, this sort of thing. We just get inundated with that. But understanding that there are two legs that hold up our societies. And without that other leg, both legs need to function, and we need to know about both of them. So, yes. So it's about what built civilization quietly and who did it. Let's see. All right, so let's get into So we very much learn the absence of evidence does not equal the absence of labor, right? It just means that the system then or now wasn't looking. And that becomes very much more evident. And we also see that this layers in nicely with Invisible Women. It layers into that book wonderfully. This just takes it back a long ways from the start, basically. Let's see. So this talks about like the Advent. So traditions are created through repetition. And repetition is created because it's successful in moving for the survival and the moving forward of a human group. And so if it works, continue doing it and you pass that on, which brings us into an important point. There's only a handful, like three, dolphins, elephants, humans, and I think one other, where the females are taken off of reproduction before end of life. Most other species, they procreate until they're dead. So they just cycle out, but they are they stay online for reproduction constantly. These other species do not, and what we find is those grandmothers are taken offline because they help the next generation and their grandchildren learn what they need to know to survive through their next generations. So that's a lot of information. They don't take men offline; they take the women offline, and it was for a very important reason: the continuation, the health, and basically just the vitality of the entire community being able to move forward. So they became the historians, the holders of knowledge. When we also factor in that men and women, because there was women hunters as well, but men had a tendency to do things where maybe they didn't make it as long. And so with those aspects, having the grandmother aspect around really helped move information, holders of information, especially before there was even writing even existed. So anyway, there's that aspect of it. Super, super important to understand the value of that wealth of information that was carried through generations this way. Okay. So traditions, some of these traditions are repetitive things through time, things that were easier while keeping children safe. Especially young moms and grandmothers would be the ones that would most commonly be closer to home. And so those things done through repetition gained tradition because, there's information that's being passed down. And that repetition became part of the repetition became tradition basically, and it was through function. Let's see. So a lot of the tasks that childbearing women with young children, this sort of thing, did tasks in the community that were more compatible with childcare, mobility patterns, and domestic production cycles. It was risk management for these early societies in keeping the children safe because those were the next generation. Men often cared for, especially as we're moving into agriculture, starting to have animals staying closer to these these early societies or communities. Men often cared for the animals. They sheared them. They harvested flax. They took excess to the market, though. And women were cleaning, spinning, dyeing, so cleaning the flax, cleaning the animal fibers, dyeing, weaving, embroidery, also tending fields, weeding, this sort of thing. So it really was a group effort. But if you have young children and you're dealing with animals, it's better to keep the children away from the animals, I mean, for obvious reasons. There was that separation, keep the little ones safe. It's also been shown that nomadic tribes, early societies that were on the move, had fewer children. Once they settled into one spot, then it shows that the women started having more children. So, and either, and we're not going to assume too much, but it just, there are clear indications that there was a shift in how many children were had once they started to settle down and domesticate. One of the other factors that would come into play as well is because you're starting to congregate in larger groups, that illnesses would wipe out young children at a higher rate. And so having more children prevented their populations from dropping too much. Although if we go through and we look at some of the history and what we kind of see with Neanderthals, it's possible that that might have been part of the attrition that they experienced as they were intermingled with Homo sapiens. I think I have that correct. They were intelligent, but they had a tendency to separate and not congregate in large groups. So in their small groups, if an illness that they were not clearly immune to was introduced, it could wipe out their entire tribe. And yeah, so yes. Okay, so so again, she kind of goes into just kind of being mindful, like things that are traditional, done repetitively. They're done repetitively because there is a structural adaptation that is happening, a necessity that's happening in the group, a need that's needing to be filled. So just basically structural adaptation. Okay, let me get into the string revolution. So this is Upper Paleolithic. So this this was a shift before metal, before writing. String was the technology, and it was a twisted fiber, and it's one of our earliest human technologies. The strings or cordage did not survive, though we see the indicators in the use of beads with the holes found in graves, primitive sculptures showing string skirts and aprons, this sort of thing. String technology was a huge breakthrough for them, like harnessing fire. So through linguistics, it can offer insight where tools may not survive today. Languages change so slowly through time that we can trace certain dialects and this sort of thing back to origin points. And then how the intermingling of societies change some aspects of that language as it moves forward. We see similar patterns in the technologies as they're picked up, such as textiles. So let's see. So nomadic lifestyles, they would always need to carry things with them. Strings were made from various plant fibers. So they used them for nets, carrying systems, binding tools, fishing, containers, and early clothing. And civilization didn't start with swords, it started with cordage. So towards the end of the Paleolithic area, and the ends, which is basically about the ends of the last ice age, going into like the Neolithic, there was a transition to primitive living sites, and they started to gather things. And textile work was basically social architecture. So the gathering of animals, the storing of food, and agriculture made having children valuable. They spread the work and made community. Women worked collectively. They did like working bees. Men also joined in, so it was a gathering point. So men might work on leather goods, creating tools and this sort of thing, while the women were doing their work, sort of a working bee or textiles or whatever they happened to be working on. There was a community. These were community activities done together. So 10,000 to 7,000 BCE, agriculture and simpler, easier animals were the first ones that were domesticated. Women would be the main kitchen gardeners, food providers for the first 4,000 years. So women basically fed their community. So they were the providers of the food. Plows and the animals that pull them would move this over to the men as time went on, so more proteins are introduced. And then production of anything was had a rhythm to it, and it was very communal. Textile work wasn't solitary drudgery. It was social hours. It was also information exchange, alliance building, economic coordination, the entire group working together. So labor networks and communication networks. These are still during periods of time when people are still very social. Like you would be excited to see a new person and what information that new person may have to offer. Let's see. So as they're going through in community networks, people are coming and going. Loom design, tools, this sort of thing. I would evolve with new information and new ways of doing things. Loom design for larger, wider cloths happened during this time. Flat looms versus hanging looms by region and weather. At the end of the Neolithic, transitioned to using sheep wool of older males. Plows became something more associated with men, and metals were more associated with men. And then kind of talk about, she goes in and she talks a little bit about the island of Crete, and that's an interesting thing altogether, and I'm really not going to go into it in much detail here. I will surmise it to say the men spent a lot of time away, and so the women were the ones that dictated who could come onto the island, when they could come onto the island, how long they could be on the island, how they greeted and protected their island, the customs that were created there, the things that as men traveled around, some of the things that they brought back home as far as like creating murals and changing textile patterns, different ways of doing weaves, finer textures, dyes, this sort of thing, this intermingling is going on. The women during this time, because women were the ones that created these textiles, because they would weave stories into their textiles, because some textiles were made for worship purposes. Others were handed down to next generations through weddings and this sort of thing, special occasions, ceremonies, this sort of thing. We can see in the pottery, in the frescoes, in the sculptures that oftentimes during the early period of time where textiles had come quite a ways, the women were very finely dressed. And so trends, there was definitely an upkeep and styles that were in play, especially as you're starting to go through stratifications or hierarchical situations. Finer cloth weaves, more complicated weaves, certain dye patterns or certain dyes in particular, because some dyes were more time consuming to create. Some of these eventually were deemed only certain colors for royalty. This sort of thing started to happen. So a lot of, and different colors signified different things, and weave patterns had different like protective values to them, like red around the collar, hems, sleeves, protected the vitals from little demons or spirits from entering your clothing, which I thought was interesting. Let's see. All right, so dyeing becomes more complex. Longer trade routes, the men are away for longer periods of time. Women are at this point running businesses, and the overflow that they produce, they put them on wagons with other goods that the men have made, and the men go to market and sell these. And we have writings between husbands and wives, or women and other family members that are supposed to be taking items to market and bringing goods and funds back. And sometimes they didn't. And there's a couple of them that have been captured, and we're aware of those. And she shares those in the book. I thought those were interesting as well. Let's see. So yes, so wall art, the frescoes, the clothing styles, women were dressed with style and skill, showing they controlled the production during that period of time. Styles became more elaborate. The Momoans in particular, we definitely saw this. Because of men's travel off the islands, women controlled the homes and who was allowed in the homes and the community. The Bronze Age, so about 3000 to 1200 BCE, the island cultures around the Mediterranean show how trade routes change textile demands, migration shifts, fiber access, and craft knowledge adapts quickly. Women's work tracks geopolitical change as well. Let me see what time it is. Okay, so it is 8:30. So I want to make these about an hour to an hour and a half. And we have covered, I do believe, everything that I was wanting to cover here. Let me just double check. So we were going to go through book intro, Finding the Invisible, The String Revolution, Courtyard Sisterhood, Bronze Age Shift. And then episode 2, we're going to get into Language of Clothes, the Code, Birth of Slavery, nasty business, and The State and Linen, and how production enters. And this is important because we have echoes in the way our societies function today. This shit has been brought forward. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff. I do thank you for joining, and if you like the content, if you want to see more, don't forget to go over to Substack. There is more. There's book guides over there. There's facilitator guides. There's the whole reading list is over there, broken down. And then there's other things over there as well. On YouTube, I will do some current events on here. I've been a little bit quiet since a few things have been going on in the news. So I've been focusing on action items offline. And so I'm going to really be pumping out a lot of videos over the next few days and weeks, just one after another, because we do have a lot of ground to cover. And I want to make sure that this stuff is available for you guys to access at will. If any of you really enjoy reading the way that I do, and you come across a book that doesn't yet have a summary or a guide associated with it, I'd be so excited if you kind of helped out. A lot of these books I have already read, but like I said, if you come across one and there's no document available, it's because I haven't had the opportunity to get to it. Nor have we had another reader pick the torch up and maybe do a companion guide with it. So anywho, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.